let it shine. We are enough.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Yes, we are enough. Hopefully you all are jamming along with me over here and just repeating that mantra to yourself, pushing it out to everyone else. And as we get started today with See My Color, Acknowledge My Trauma, and Change the Outcome, we think about our young people, our next generation, and we think about ways to make them know that they are enough. So it's great to be with you all this morning. As I was mentioning earlier, it's 7 a.m. this morning, my time. I'm joining you all from California. I am Crystal Bennett. I am the CEO and founder of THRYVE LLC. And the work that we do through THRYVE is providing workshops, coaching, and consultation really around all things trauma informed, but specifically focusing on the topics of racial trauma, intergenerational trauma, human trafficking, especially as it pertains to our individuals who are of oppressed and marginalized communities, and then work around motivational interviewing, as well as some suicide, particularly around suicide amongst Black youth. So it's great to be with you this morning. I hope that you'll engage with me in the chat box, keep the chatter up. I'll be asking a lot of questions over the next hour, as well as, certainly presenting some information. So what I wanted to do is start off this morning with just reading a series of statements that I've heard in my professional career, that I've heard in my personal lives, and just start getting us thinking and feeling about what these statements mean to us. What are the feelings that become generated in our bodies? What are the thoughts that start to enter into our minds as I read off some of these statements? So certainly feel free to jot those thoughts down in the chat box as I'm reading through each of these. So the first one I'll start off with is skin color is the same as eye color. It's not that significant. Okay? Just kind of let that sit with you. And what does that mean to you? What are the feelings and the thoughts that start to enter into your bodies and mind? We should focus on what makes us similar. We are all one race, the human race. Talking about race only divides us. I don't see color. And the last one I'll put up here for you all, all lives matter. I see someone said dismissive. They don't allow for true conversations. They shut those conversations down. They put up the walls, create some defensiveness, often on behalf of the individual that might be making these comments. What else comes up for you all? And so sometimes we find ourselves asking, what are people really trying to say when they're making these statements? And we get caught up in the intentions of the statements rather than actually considering what is the impact. Okay, so I see someone else says that there's a certain combativeness with all lives matter. Right? We don't hear all lives matter unless it's a response to the indication that Black lives matter. Is there a lack of emotional intelligence? There's some fear of having to recognize the parts of the system that harms other. And I'm really glad that you mentioned our part in a system. And I say our because as a whole, many of us are part of systems and uphold systems that tend to uphold white supremacy culture and white supremacy values. These are diverting due to shame, maybe due to guilt. We try to divert away from the true conversation. So certainly keep the comments coming. But what I want to say as we start off our time together is the importance of stopping these types of comments in their tracks, right? Again, this is not about intention, because oftentimes we're here individuals who might make these statements, and then when called in or called out about these statements, we hear, well, I didn't mean to. Well, we're past the point of intentions, and we're at the point where we have to shift to the impact, because whether one means to or not, the impact is harmful. The impact creates barriers in being able to engage in helping relationships, right? For me, and I speak from my standpoint as a cis woman, as a mother, as a Black woman, but I don't speak on behalf of every woman. I don't speak on behalf of every Black individual. I don't speak on behalf of every cis individual, right? We're not all monolithic, and we have the intersectionalities of our identities, but I do speak on behalf of what it is that I hear, what it is that I feel, and my experiences in having done this work for over 20 years. In engaging with individuals and engaging with communities. So first and foremost, when I hear that you're colorblind, that you don't see my color, how can you not see me? Right? I am front and center on your screen. You see color. Even if you truly were medically colorblind, you see a shade, right? Additionally, when we talk about color blindness, or we talk about all lives matter, or we're all the human race, that sends a feeling of awkwardness about me and about the cultures that I belong to. Right? It's like this big elephant in the room. Have any of you ever been engaged in a conversation with someone that's intentionally tiptoeing around not saying the race of the person that they're mentioning when the race is relevant to the conversation? And it's a heavy conversation. It feels awkward. It doesn't feel genuine. And I love the comment in the comment box, in the chat box, see me in totality. Right? Because if you don't see my color, then you don't see me. You aren't seeing me in totality. I'm not all, the only thing about me isn't my color. But when you take that out, then you're missing the whole person. And the message that's being sent is not only that you don't see me in totality, but that you don't want to see me in totality, that you don't want to appreciate me, that you don't want to see the beauty in all that I am and get to know about me, my history, my culture, that richness. And if you're not able to see me in totality, then you're being blind to what the consequences might be that I experience as I navigate the world around me. And as we engage with individuals and our helpers and walk alongside the individuals and communities that have experienced marginalization and experienced oppression, how can we validate the feelings, the thoughts, and the experience? How do we establish ourselves as a safe person if we can't validate and if we're not able to understand and recognize the consequences that might be present? And last, but certainly not least, what I think about when I hear those statements is white fragility. So in a lot of the work that I do have the privilege to be able to engage with white folks, white professionals who are behavioral health care providers. And as we think about practicing cultural humility and being competent around our own biases, our own approaches, it's important that I push and that I ask, is it that you don't see my color as a white individual, or is it that you don't see your own? Appreciate the comments that are coming in. Certainly keep them coming. I'll read things out. If you have questions, I'll make sure that I read those out as well. So I'm curious, and I want to ask you all, if this idea of color blindness is so harmful, where did it come from? Why is it so prevalent? Why do we find that so many individuals utilize that statement, I don't see color? And as you're thinking, about why, and I hear someone, fear, insecurity. Wonder, fear of what? I'll read a quote that I'm sure probably 99% of us on here are familiar with. From his iconic I Have a Dream speech, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Now, why would I put up Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote? Am I blaming Dr. King? Of course I'm not. But what you will find is that many individuals will utilize this quote to uphold their beliefs of color blindness. And that's not due much to their own thinking, but it's due to our history. So during the tumult of the civil rights movement, what we found is that many individuals began to co-opt the language of civil rights leaders, particularly conservatives. And conservatives took the language that was being used by many civil rights leaders and twisted it in order to make their own racist rhetoric more publicly palatable. So one such leader, whose name was James Kilpatrick, who was a Southern journalist, it's believed that Mr. Kilpatrick twisted the words of Dr. King in order to argue that color blindness should be the American idea. And in Kilpatrick's version of color blindness, Americans shouldn't be judged on their race, but based on their merits and qualifications. So some of you may be thinking that's not such a bad thing. It is. Because if we think about in the height of the civil rights movement, we're talking about the history of enslavement. We're talking about Jim Crow. We're talking about a time where on a whole, white people would have had significantly higher qualifications because of the opportunities that they were allowed to pursue. So in other words, the idea of color blindness has been used as a weaponization against the Black community and other communities of color in order to further consolidate the social, political, and economic power of white folks. And why do I bring this up to you this morning? Because you're probably thinking, I didn't log in for a history lesson. That's okay, because I failed history myself growing up. But as I was failing history, I was often told, you need to know history because history repeats itself. And so here we sit in 2022, 60 years after Dr. King made his speech, where not only are we experiencing color blindness, but the history repeating itself is all lives matters. All lives matters is the weaponization continuing to be perpetrated against Black and brown communities to continue to uphold social, economic, and political power and maintain the status quo. Just a note I want to make for some of you, because there's a lot of awesome chat going on in the chat box. Make sure that your "to" in the chat box is to everyone and not just to the host and panelists, because then everyone doesn't see the amazing thoughts and comments that you're making and it only comes to myself. So I want to make sure that everyone gets to chatter in the chat box with one another. Yes, but thank you for the amazing comments. So what about our kids, right? So this morning session is really a lot about our young people, about our kids. Do our children see color? Yeah, think. Our kids. Right? Someone says, I think they do, but they don't care. Someone else says it's not inherent. I want to get our juices flowing this morning and get us thinking. I'm going to show a very brief, it may be about a 4-minute video. And some of you may be familiar with the study that's in the video that's being referred to, which is the baby doll experiment. And I'll give some context after I show the video, and then we can kind of engage in some chatterbox dialogue. I will forewarn you, just trigger warning on the video. It can evoke some very strong emotions, especially as we look at the impact of color on the way that our kids are experiencing the world around them. So what I'd like you to do is, as thoughts and comments come up throughout the video, just type them in the chat box so then we can engage in some conversation afterwards.
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll?
That one.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because she's white and she has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me?
Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
Okay.
That doll.
Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one.
I'm killing.
This one.
That one?
I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
He's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
Yeah, that one.
Which one?
This one.
Why do you want that skin color?
Because I don't know. I don't know.
Not sure. What do you think of that skin color?
Well, it looks kind of whitish, and that's all I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you? Why do you want that skin color?
Because it looks lighter than this kind, because this looks a lot like that one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I just don't like the way brown looks, because the way brown looks looks really nasty for some reason, but I don't know what reason. That's all.
So you think it looks nasty?
Well, not really, but sometimes.
Sometimes. And Brielle, they asked what color adults don't like. Do you remember what you said? Which one? That's right, that's what you said. Why do you think adults don't like that color?
Dark.
Dark. And adults, you think adults don't like dark?
Well, maybe some adults do, but maybe some of them don't.
Hmm. And then which was the ugly child?
So show me the smart child. Okay, why is she the smart child?
Because she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the mean child. Okay, why is she the mean child?
Because she's way darker.
Okay. Show me the good child. Why is she the good child?
Because I think she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the bad child. Why is she the bad child?
Because she's a lot darker.
Show me the ugly child. Why is she the ugly child?
Because she's like, a lot darker.
Take a couple moments just to take a couple deep breaths. Very, very heavy video. So I'd love for you to comment in the chat box. Just what are some initial thoughts and feelings and gut reactions from this video? And as you think back to the initial question that I posed around, do kids see color? Because I saw some comments before the video around they do, but maybe they don't understand the significance, or they do, but it doesn't dictate how they treat others. Right? But what did we just see? And where do we think what we just saw comes from? Kids say exactly what they're taught, even if it's nonverbal. You hear just the impact that some of you all are communicating, right? It's shattering, it's devastating, it's powerful, makes you want to cry. Systemic self-hatred, right? That internalized racism. Thinking about parents who don't recognize that this is how their children are feeling, right? I mentioned early on that I do a lot of work around suicide amongst Black youth, right? And absolutely spot on when you think about that fear, because if we're not recognizing the impact and we're not working to prevent it or at least intervene, it definitely can be a matter of life or death. All right, so I said I would give a little context to the video. After watching the video, please keep the thoughts and comments going in the chat box. So the original baby doll study was actually conducted more than 60 years ago by Kenneth and Mamie Clark. And essentially what they found was very similar to what you watched, even though what you watched is decades after that original version. So the original version was used in the Board of Education versus Brown to demonstrate the importance of integration. However, as we sit here in 2022, what we know about integration is schools are actually more segregated today than they were prior to Board versus Brown. And we're still seeing this study being repeated over and over and over, nationwide and worldwide, demonstrating the same results. Right? Kids as young as 4 and 5 years old, research shows that at the ages of 4 and 5 is that white children show a value towards whiteness, and Black and brown children show a bias or a favor towards whiteness. Right? So let me say that again, is by the ages of 4 and 5 years old, white children show a bias in favor of whiteness, and Black and brown children show a bias in favor of whiteness. Dr. Beverly Tatum, who wrote the book, Why Are All of the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, describes this as dominant white supremacy culture that's like a smog that we're all walking in, breathing in, feeling each and every day, right? It's like that fish in the fish pool that doesn't know they're in water. We are all walking in white supremacy culture that is defining for us and defining for our children what is right, what is wrong, what is beautiful, what is ugly, what is professional, what is not professional, what is good, what is bad. And so our kids are seeing that in the books, they're seeing it in the media, they're seeing it when they go out to the grocery store and what is the food that's available and what isn't. They're seeing it when they go to the restaurant, they see it when they go to the stores to get clothing. As a military family, we've traveled all over the nation, and I see it when we get plopped somewhere and I can't find someone to do my hair or the kids of my hair and have to drive an hour to find someone that knows how to do Black hair or that I can get Black beauty supplies. That is the message that's being constantly sent of being less than, of being undervalued. And that is what our kids are internalizing. So when we think about how do we counteract this for our kids, the only way to counteract anti-Blackness and anti-brownness is through pro-Blackness and pro-brownness, which is not anti-whiteness. But what it means is that we have to work so much harder to make sure that our young people see representation and feel valued, and working prior to that bias kicking in at 4 and 5 years old. So I say all of this to reinforce the necessity that we have to talk about race. We can't turn a blind eye and act like race is not a factor that's impacting whether we survive or whether we thrive. Talking about race is not racist, but being colorblind upholds modern day racism. Being colorblind allows the perpetration of inequities and violence and allows modern day racism to continue to manifest, which is covert, it's subtle, it's insidious, and it's often manifested by those nasty microaggressions. Okay? Microaggressions, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, so this will be a relatively quick overview. But microaggressions are microassaults, which are overt, in your face, deliberative, intended to offend. And typically when someone is called out for perpetrating a microaggression, the response is to gaslight. Right? I was just kidding. You people take everything so seriously. A micro insult. These are typically unintentional or unconscious, but let's go back to what I said 30 minutes ago. The intent doesn't matter because the impact is still that a discriminatory message is being communicated. Assumptions of criminality often fall into the category of micro insults, right? Someone grabbing their purse as a group of Black boys passes by. Or you're sitting at that red light and a group of teenagers walk by and reach over and you click your button to lock your doors and don't even know why you did it. Because it's unconscious, it's ingrained, it's due to that bias that's seated deep within. Also, under micro insults are assumptions around intellectual inferiority. Something I've heard all of my life, you're so articulate. That is not a compliment. It's more of a, oh, I didn't expect you to be so articulate. You're so articulate. Also under micro assaults is saviorism, which often filters through much of the work that many of us do in the systems that we belong to. And then micro-invalidations are those statements which deny or negate or undermine reality. So that's that bootstrap theory and color blindness. So the impact of these microaggressions are anything but micro. One study found that in a 3-month period, middle schoolers of color reported an average of 291 microaggressions. 291 microaggressions for one middle schooler in a 3-month period. That's more than 3 a day. So when you think about a microaggression, which many people compare to little mosquito bites, just think about it. 3 mosquito bites a day, another 3 the next day, another 3 the next day. Think about the agitation, think about the pain, think about the irritation, think about the hypervigilance of looking around for that next mosquito, trying to zap it, try to run away from it before it gets you. Think about what's happening to our kids each and every day as they're going into spaces experiencing microaggressions. And then wondering why our kids can't sit in an academic setting and focus on the academics, because there's everything else that's bombarding them. And these fears and this need to watch their backs, this need to present in a way that is appropriate to the code of conduct, present in a way where one isn't under the magnifying glass being watched every moment. How does this resonate with you all? Right? I don't know how many of you work with kids, how many of you have children, but what do you think that impact is on our kids as we're thinking about microaggressions and navigating spaces? And I see the comment in the chat box that you had a coworker that would go to Haiti every year and say how impacted she was, but would not step foot in West Birmingham. When I asked what her advocacy looked like, she unfriended me. That's that saviorism, right? And there's nothing wrong with going overseas. There's nothing wrong with wanting to, provide assistance, but it's the way in which it's done. And so often we find that individuals will go, overseas, and they're othering people that live in other countries, and put the pictures on Facebook and want that pat on the back for going in and saving those poor people and those poor kids, rather than actually thinking about the root causes and the situations of colonialism and capitalism that's leading to the circumstances that many individuals have to experience in the first place. So what I often tell people that say that they're colorblind is I say, well, take off the blindfold, right? Because when we navigate spaces, being colorblind, it seems to suggest that we don't have a choice of whether or not to be dismissive of the impact of race, but we do have a choice. And if we continue to remain colorblind, it continues to invalidate and be disruptive to the therapeutic process. We have to take off the blindfold because we need to be able to see the inequities that do indeed exist. So on your screen, you're seeing 6 true or false questions. Let's just pause for a moment, and I want for you to just read through each of these on your own and maybe make a note if you've got a little notepad, or make a mental note of whether these are true or false. And we'll go through them one by one, but just take a moment and read through them and familiarize yourself with what you think right now. Ooh, I see that comment in the chat box. And I'll read it out because I see that it's to hosts and panelists. So I want to make sure everyone sees this. So we have a comment that said, I was shopping at Publix. I do love Publix, by the way. We don't have that in California. And an older white man looked around, you know, being around 75 or 80 years old, stopped you. So stopped this person in the chat box and said that the person was pretty for a colored girl. Right? Like, just even reading that, and I appreciate you sharing what happens in my body just in reading that, the impact of that microaggression, which again feels a bit more like a macroaggression, doesn't it? And that's that fetishization, you know, the fetishizing that we see for particularly women of color. So thank you for sharing. All right, so let me read each of these. So let's go one by one. So the first one, so go ahead and type in the chat box if you thought this was true or false. Black children are 4 times as likely to die from asthma than their white counterparts. So I'm seeing some comments come through. I'm seeing some trues. I see a sad face with a tear. Trues, trues, trues. Okay. So I hate to do y'all like this on the first one, but the first one is false, and it's false because it's higher. Okay. So the true statistic on this one is that Black children here in the United States are actually 8 times as likely to die from asthma. So I just want to pause and let you sit with that. Because I do think, although a lot of statistics are very shocking to me, it is very shocking to think about being in the United States of America, where we have some of the best healthcare that exists, and to see that Black children are dying from asthma at 8 times the rate of their white counterparts. What about the second one here? Black girls are 3 times more likely to be disciplined than their white female classmates. True or false? Now I got y'all thinking. Yeah, true, true, true. This is another one that is false. Here in the United States, what we find is that Black girls are actually on average 6 times more likely to be disciplined than their white female classmates. In some states, that number rises as high as 10 times. The next one is true. African-American babies are as twice as likely to die before their first birthday, regardless of socioeconomic status. This one down at the bottom left is false. So 30% of all prostitution arrests for youth under age 18 are Black youth. That number is actually 51%. Now, this one I want you to sit with for a minute. 51% of prostitution arrests for youth under age 18 are of Black youth. How are we arresting anyone under the age of 18 for prostitution when we know that those are kids who are being raped? Right, the bottom middle one. What did you all come up with? True or false? The rate of suicide amongst Black youth is increasing faster than any other racial group. So this one is true, and I do see someone's comment around Indigenous youth. Indigenous youth actually The increase is not, they're not increasing faster. So Indigenous youth actually do have an extremely high suicide rate, but it isn't that it's increasing, it's that it's been at an extremely high rate. Right? So that's certainly not to negate that there is a very high rate of suicide amongst Indigenous communities, particularly amongst Indigenous youth. However, for our Black youth, what we've actually seen is over the last 25 years or so, so from 1991 to 2017, we've actually seen an increase in suicide attempts for Black youth of 73%. We've seen death rates for Black girls has increased by 182%. And then for Black youth who are ages 5 to ages 12, they are twice as likely to die by suicide than their white counterparts. And then the last one is our schools that serve youth in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods received $23 billion less in funding. How are we feeling? What's standing out to you? Right, I know that I've delivered this nationwide, and every time I get to these numbers, there's just something that happens in my body. It is that visceral response. Right? Anything that particularly is standing out for you, I see heavy with sadness, right? It's heavy. And I give you the numbers knowing that it's heavy, but I give the numbers because so often in this work to try to dismantle oppressive systems, people want proof, right? Well, show me the demographics, show me the statistics, show me the disparities. Here it is. It's in black and white. You need more. I got decks and decks and decks that I can send to you if you need the proof. Hey, the proof is here. Now, what are we going to do with it? And I hear someone say Black youth are not protected. It's sickening to hear and see the numbers of the systemic bias against children. I've read these one by one, but to see them all together is overwhelming. Sad, makes you angry. Yes. Yes, the motivation to keep working. Right? In a moment such as this, as heavy as it is, and like I said, I can produce slide after slide after slide, but I won't do that to y'all this morning because it's a lot, right? But in moments like this, I think of the Sankofa bird, right? And certainly feel free to do your own research and your own due diligence around, what I'm speaking of. But the Sankofa bird is a bird that can be seen flying forward with its head turned back, with its egg in its mouth. And it's a representation of the turning back to pull and draw our strength from our ancestors, that in moments such as these, particularly for Black and brown communities, felt so hopeless, so helpless, so angry. And for us to draw that strength and knowing that even in those moments where they didn't know if anything would change, that they kept going forward. And that because of what our ancestors did, that's why many of us who particularly are from Black and brown communities get to sit in spaces that we sit in. But now we know that there is still much work to do. And so we have to draw that strength and bring it forward and then keep moving forward. Yes, to mobilize and make changes and to plant those seeds, knowing that it's our future generations. Because the impact of what we just saw leads to this internalization. It leads to a destruction of our mental self-concept. It leads to our destruction of our physical well-being. It leads to our destruction of our ability to connect with others and to love one another, particularly in the communities that we're part of. And it leads to a destruction of a reliance on our spirituality. right? Internalized oppression is real. It is that sense of inferiority, feeling less than, feeling grounded and being stuck as a victim. It leads to feeling overwhelmed and drained as adults and as young people. Right? Over the course of the last several years, I can personally speak to and attest to just how overwhelmed and drained I've been. And that there's mornings that I lay in bed and I just stare at the ceiling, not wanting to move because I'm trying to find that energy. Internalized oppression leads to reading spaces, right? We enter into spaces and we're trying to read the space to determine, is this space safe or safe enough? And colorism. So breaking one another down because of the color of our skin, right? That is the hand of the oppressor still at work. Leads to code switching. And code switching is not an attempt to fit in with white culture, but it's the necessity to survive it. But if I have to code switch each and every day, what does that say about how I feel about who I am? If I have to continue to try to be something other than who it is that I truly am. So we have to look at the mental, physical, physiological impact and social health impact, particularly when we're thinking about our kids, but even much of this can be applied to ourselves. I'm very curious. Anybody want to put their hand up in the chat box or give an indication here? Right, we think about all of the events of the last several years, right? The heaviness that's being carried, this re-experiencing of trauma, the desire to want to avoid, body aches, sleep problems, headaches, intrusive thoughts, an attempt to numb ourselves or just feeling numb and not wanting to feel numb, but we can't figure out how to unnumb. Hyperarousal, hypervigilance, anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, and then externalizing and internalizing. We have to recognize the trauma that's occurring in our communities. And I love this quote from Black Panther, right? But we can no longer watch from the shadows. We cannot. We have to commit that we will not. We have to connect amongst ourselves. More connects us than separates us. But in times of crisis, the wise build bridges, while the foolish build barriers. And we must find a way to look after one another as if we were one single tribe. Right? So what are some ways that you all can generate around how do we look after each other? How do we look after our kids, right? You know, that old adage, it takes a village. How do we become that village? First and foremost, our healing begins with safety. And safety is not something you or I define for someone else. Safety is about asking individuals, asking communities, what is it that they need to feel safe? What does safety look like? First and foremost, when we're talking about working with communities of color, safety looks like the practice of cultural humility, creating the space to have conversations around race, creating the space to hear the story, creating the space to validate, creating the space to see color. And we create that space by exploring our own racial identities, identifying what parts of ourselves do we each hold privilege in, and what parts of ourselves may we experience oppression. And how does that impact the way that we navigate and see the world, but also how does that impact the way in which clients and individuals and communities may interact or see us? Someone says slowing down, encouraging others to slow down. Normalization of not having to be productive. Productivity does not equate our worth. Yes, right? And that's that quality over quantity. That is that white supremacy characteristic, is there's such a focus on sense of urgency and how much can we accomplish, rather than simply taking a moment to slow down and focus on the relationships and the quality of the relationships, especially for our communities of color, because for many of our communities of color, the value is on collectivism and community. It is not a value on individual accomplishment and competitiveness. Now, working against the hyper-individualistic nature of the capitalistic society. Yes. Yes. We believe that our kids can succeed and thrive. And if we believe that, how do we place our kids at the helm? Placing our kids in positions where they have the power and their voices are centered. How do we not only utilize restorative practices, but we also recognize the importance of transformative practices? Transformative practices around really peeling back the layers and looking at not just the harm and the resolution of the harm, but looking at why does the harm exist to begin with, and how do we break down and dismantle the systems and reconstruct the systems so that harm isn't done to begin with. We have to do work with our kids around understanding where they come from. Right? Not giving messages about race is fine until it is not. Our kids will come up with their own ideas about race if we don't take the time to be intentional about the conversations. And in the words of Marcus Garvey, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. What does that look like? It looks like kids with no path, kids with no vision for a future, kids that are easily influenced and swept away by whichever way the wind is blowing of the day. It's about socializing our kids and teaching our kids about their history. Teaching them about their culture. Right? What do our kids know about their heritage? What pride do they have in who they are and where they come from? What do they know about their history besides slavery? Right? They realize their history was interrupted by enslavement. You can appreciate the culture and community of their people prior to enslavement and the recognition of the fight and rebellion that took place during enslavement. We have to teach our kids about the existence of discrimination and bias and how to respond. So someone else says acknowledgement of the trauma, right? And resolving to eliminate it, which is a great segue here as we're thinking about eliminating trauma. Invoking the power of names. So many of our kids have their names mispronounced each and every day. Evoke the power of a name. Connect to eldership, understanding and practicing somatic healing. To be African American is to be African with no memory, and to be American with no privilege. We must affirm and acknowledge, understand and accept the role of race. Create the space to be open, to be curious. Engage in storytelling. Validate. Name. Help to put words to an experience. Help our young people recognize their self-worth, build protective factors, and how can they rechannel their rage. And how do we intentionally create space where our Black boys and our Black girls, our Black kids can experience joy? Because our life is not all trauma. But we need the spaces to be able to navigate what does it mean to be a young person growing up Black, and how can I be in a space where I feel safe, space where I can engage in art, space where I can engage in music, space where I can engage in dance, space where I can just show up and simply just be. So I know we're coming to the end of our time this morning, but I ask you all, and I love that someone says being intentional, right? Because that's exactly what I was gonna say. I ask that you all leave this space being intentional and continuing to evaluate the impact of your thoughts, your feelings, your biases, your actions. Think about how we can continue to be mandated supporters for our Black and brown youth, rather than explicitly focusing on mandated reporting and the vulnerabilities and the risks that may exist. And ask yourself, how do you continue to work with individuals and work with communities in ways that you can respond in a way that's liberating and provides harm reduction and is based on decolonizing practices that can center the voices of our kids, their families, and ultimately the Black and brown community. So I ask you all that you no longer accept the things that you cannot change, and that as you walk away from this session this morning, that you commit to changing the things that you cannot accept any longer. I appreciate all of your time this morning. And I know there's just a couple minutes left, so any last minute thoughts, questions, or comments in the chat box. And please feel free to send me an email if I can be of any additional resource to you as you continue to do your work in the future.